move on to the second speaker, who is one of the organizers of this wonderful conference, Victoria Puchal. She holds a PhD in English language, literature and culture from the Universitat de València. Her main lines of research are 19th century popular theatre and gender and cultural studies. She's a lecturer and title coordinator at the Valencia International University, which is collaborator of the research group Literature, Arts and Performance, led by Laura at the Universitat de Valencia. Among her latest publications, performing the female alternative in Victorian popular drama in 2021, You Saved Her Life and She Adores You for It, La Buena Salvaje en el melodrama inglés de los 1860, 2021, and Pernicious Female Role Models and Mid-Victorian London Stage, 2021. The title of her paper is Fishing Fleets on Stage, Victorian Women and the Colonies in Tom Taylor's Comedies. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosario. And thanks to all of you for being here today. We are really excited. So I just wanted to say that before I started. I have to say thank you to Laura and Rosario as well for organizing this, to being wonderful colleagues, wonderful mentors. And also thanks to my girls, the ones who have been also working in the organization of this conference, Lina, Andrea, Sarai, Chris, and Marta. So, yeah, let's start. One of the things that I would like to show you today is taken from my thesis, from my PhD thesis, even though this is just a small glimpse of what I did during my thesis, right? Because I would say that, and this is something that I keep thinking of, my PhD thesis, the dissertation was sort of like the gift that keeps on giving, right? I keep trying, I keep finding topics that I can explore from my thesis, but it's also a bit of a nightmare at the end, right? So that never ends. So yeah, in any case, well, back when I started, the first thing that I wanted to try to find was the figure of the mobile female the lady, right? The mobile lady. But I specifically tried to find women who were able to cross boundaries. That is physically, but also metaphorically, right? I would say that it was very difficult because I have been reading about Mary Kingsley and I have been reading about Isabella Bird, right? And I was trying to find that example reflected on stage. And that was extremely frustrating because I could not find that type of woman. I am from small examples. Today I will show you a different type of displacement. And so you will see that, well, this will be a response to one of the main events because I focused on the mid-century, there's on the 50s, 60s, right? And so at the time they were talking about this surplus of women, right? So I wanted to see how that was reflected on stage. So in order to illustrate my findings, I will analyze just one play, one of Tom Taylor's so-called Indian plays. It's also one of my favorites. It's called Up at the Hills, and it's from 1860. I think that this is a very convenient choice, and I am sure that this is, well, I did not intend it to be like this, but yeah, we have been talking about India during the conference, right? So yeah, appropriate. So my main focus would be the way in which certain types, as I said before, from the period, these women were performing stage. That is the British immigrant lady who traveled to India in order to find a husband. These women, as you can see in my title, were usually part of the fishing fleet. Right. Yeah, so I was wondering where are the mobile female characters, right? Fishing fleet, but what is a fishing fleet? Besides, well, despite what we might think in the first place, this expression does not refer to the actual boats going to deep sea in order to catch fish, right? and you will be able to see some similarities with our fishing fleets in a minute. As the course it says, and in this wonderful volume, the fishing fleet, fishing fleets were groups of British women who traveled to India in search of profitable matrimony. So, not a fish, but maybe they were trying to catch a wealthy officer or, a company civilian. As the course explains, at the beginning of the colonial mission, and I quote, "From time to time, the company paid the passage out to India of a number of willing women." The first record that we have of this is from as early as 1671, when 20 women were sent out to Bombay in hopes of marrying company employees in search of a British bride. So there are many things that we should, or that we can analyze here, right? Especially because if we think of the situation of marriages back in the colonies, we know that there was a desire to avoid intermarriages, right? Interracial marriages. British officers needed to be married to British respectable ladies. That was the idea. And given that not many British ladies were allowed or could afford to travel, it was a good idea to ship them out. As the course explains, prospective brides were classified into two categories. On the one hand, they have gender women, and on the other, they have other. That's it. They were given a year in India with all expenses covered, and they were supposed to find a husband during that year. If they misbehaved, they were punished. They had restrictive diets, and if the transgression was too big, they were shipped back to England. So if their mission was not accomplished after a year, they were not allowed to stay in India. They had to go back, and they were called, and I quote, "return empties." Very, very sad. So we can see how this was at the very beginning, right? This changed by the mid-century because the company was no longer paying for women to go to the colonies. Instead of that, they were charging them. So India was a very profitable colony. And therefore, it was a very attractive hunting ground for women, right? Those women who were searching for profitable matrimony. Evidently, as the course mentions, not every girl could afford paying. It was £200 for the passage. So just by establishing that fare, they were making sure that only wealthy women were traveling to the colony, right? Well, what was the social climate for women back in England? Why were they paying good money to travel to the colonies? This might have been due to what I said before, what was called the, and I quote, redundancy of middle-class single women. The situation that labeled women as redundant first started after the 1851 British census revealed that there was a statistical surplus of women. This surplus, in combination with the unmarriageable, unemployable situation of many middle-class women, provoked that spike of the public debate on the woman question, right? Were those women really redundant, or were they just not allowed to have a purpose outside of traditional matrimony and familial obligations? It was clear that they needed to reevaluate gender divisions and obviously female education. So in response to this surplus, there were two different takes. On the one hand, traditionalists insisted that female emigration was an admirable quest when done with the purpose of fulfilling women's work outside of England, right? That is obviously marriage, childbearing. And then on the other hand, we had feminist groups who were trying to promote the idea of female emigration as the best remedy for idleness and as an effective means to, and I quote, make women happy, and ultimately to promote the independence of women. So that second idea, the feminist take was fully endorsed by feminist groups of the time, the Common Place and the female middle class immigration society, which is something that I think could be really interesting to analyze as well. So obviously, when considering the traditional take, we have to think if they were not able to fulfill their natural role of marrying and childbearing, they will have to go somewhere else, right, to do so. So why India? I go back to the cursor's volume. She says, and perhaps as an overstatement, and I quote, "In England, a land where women outnumber marriageable men, a girl without money, beauty, or grand relations had little hope of making a good match. In India, she was showered with immediate proposals." So in reality, as we have seen before when discussing the history of the fishing fleet, there was much more to it than just immediate proposals, right? So the newspapers at the time would often comment on Anglo-Indian society, and they would describe the hardships of these women, right? The things that they had to endure in India. At the I don't have it here, sorry. At the Saturday Review said in 1861, this is a long quote, but I'm going to read it. "A lady in India is commonly deprived of those home duties and occupations which brighten and give a perpetual charm to the domestic earth in England. The care and education of her own children are denied to the mother in a country where she most needs such employment. If not prepared to part with them, with the kids, at an early age, she must run the risk of losing them altogether. And what has she to supply their place, unlike the oppressive leisure which their absence has created? The English woman at home may escape from the darkness and solitude of her own drawing room by outdoor exercise and amusements at any hour of the day throughout the year. But the killing sun or merciless hot breeze generally keeps her less fortunate sister in the east a close prisoner to the home from sunrise to sunset, all the year round." So talk about claustrophobic, right? In India, as Wagner has also discussed, solitary female travelers had to face many perils that their married counterparts would not. So under the protection of their husbands, a traveling wife or a wife altogether was, and I quote, "protected by the presence of her husband against the most powerful of terrorizing influence, that is, the solitude, which magnifies perils and weakens resistance." Right, so in order to see how this situation was depicted in the mid-Victorian stage, I selected the play, the comedy Up of the Hills, which was written by Tom Taylor, and it was first performed at the St. James Theatre in October 1860. As you know, Tom Taylor was very well known among the Victorians because of the intelligent, fast-paced dialogues and his way of portraying Victorian society. So the only collection of plays that was published during Taylor's own lifetime was that of historical dramas. He had a predilection for historical female figures, right? Like for instance, Joan of Arc. He worked with female characters, female, identities, and you can see that in his plays. He was also influenced by melodrama, domestic drama, burst drama, and was an editor and contributor of Punch, which is quite telling of his type of humor. He had a period during the 60s in which he apparently became fascinated by the life of Anglo-Indian society. As you can see, he produced these two, The Overland Road and Up of the Hills, and then he has another one, which is called The Dragon and His Bunker, I think, which is not exactly set in India, but it depicts that journey in the south of Europe. So Obviously, I think this was because of the, I think that's something that Kate Newry mentioned yesterday, the spike of interest back in Britain after the mutiny in 1857 and the supposed capture of the leader of the Indian mutineers, supposed capture, right? So both The Open Road and Up at the Hills include very interesting female characters. As I said before, he loved female characters. They practically lead the plays. And even though I think that both are very relevant to our topic today, I will mostly focus on the second, Up at the Hills. Right, so as we have just mentioned, this one, Up at the Hills, was first performed at the St. James Theatre, October 22nd, 1860. As you know, the St. James was in the heart of fashionable London, and it normally had a polite middle-class audience. At the time, during the 60s, it was managed by the Wigan Matrimony. They patronized the comic repertoire, burlesques, dramas of French inspiration as well, and even spectacular extravaganzas. So in Up at the Hills, what Taylor tried to do is to bring a glimpse of Anglo-Indian society to the metropolis, right? And he was discussing topics such as British women's social morality while in the station, in this case at the Hills, which is something different than the stations. And also he discussed the soldiers' dubious entertainment and the reversal of roles in matrimony. These directions are a little bit confusing in terms of setting. Like for instance, in scene 1, they indicate that the scene is set at a hill station in India. That's it. With the sight of Himalayan rhododendrons, right? His lack of attention to detail and lack of authenticity was highly criticized at the time. And they were complaining about the dubious verisimilitude of the event. However, as we might think at first, or that those were my expectations, I was trying to find these intrepid women traveling by themselves, you know, not the case. There are two female well, the play avoids going into, sorry, because I'm getting ahead of myself. The play avoids going into details of the political climate of the time, and it focuses on the psychological intricacies of two women. There are two female leads. The first one is, as you can see in this one, Miss Clara Everlight. Sorry, she was played by Louisa Ruth Herbert, who is someone that we knew, that we talked about yesterday. She was a super well-known actress, and she was very well known for her beauty. And then we have a second one, the second female lead, who was Mrs. Isabella Colonel McCann. She was played by the manageress, in this case, Nora Wigham. In the play, Taylor tells the story of a young widow, Mrs. Everlight, who had been exchanging some flirtatious letters with a Major Stanihurst. Shockingly, that apparently happened during her matrimony, before she had become a widow. So, in consonance with the times, Major Stanihurst is after her because of her money, mainly, and has no hesitation in threatening her to discover that affair. Well, not affair, really, criminal conversation, if I may. He wants to marry her. However, his plan is ruined after the wife of the station's colonel, that is Mrs. McCann, right, asserts her dominance at the station because she is the actual leader, she is the real leader of the station. She gets the help of a young Indian maid and steals the letters. And so Major Stanihurst has no proof whatsoever. Okay. So as we have seen before when discussing fishing fleets and the position of British women in India, we can see how Mrs. Adelaide, who is the young widow, right, seems to be completely lost without the protection of her husband. Major Stanihurst takes advantage of that helplessness, as you can see in that quote, and constantly reminds her of her vulnerable position. Those fellows would eat you up alive, unprotected female as you are. Right? So he helps her with receipts, accounts, clothing matters, and she's constantly seen as physically indisposed. She is reclining languidly in the lounging chair, surrounded by her Indian servants, and it seems that without a family, she has no purpose. She has lost her bond to the colony after her husband's decease. Not deceased. So the second female leader, as I said before, would be Miss Colonel McCann, Isabella, right? And she is, as I said before, the leader. She commands everything, and the soldiers rely on her for everything, and affirm, as you can see in the first quote, that the regiment would be a chaotic place were it not for her work. For some, she is also a mother, as you can see, and she is aware of that. She takes advantage of it and knows every piece of gossip that is going around. However, and this is the part that gets interesting to me, she welcomes some girls from Britain and finds them a place at the station up at the hills. We can see two girls. These are not the actual actresses because I could not find the names of the actresses, but I imagine that they would look something like this. Right, so these two girls are her two nieces, Kate and Margaret. They arrive in Calcutta on consignment to her, and she clearly knows that they will do better up at the hills than down at the station. They will more likely to find us they will more likely find a suitable maid partner there, because the hills were often considered a place of leisure, right? Instead, they were different from the station. Kate and Margaret will be our fishing fleet. And Tom Taylor, as you can see, shows us two girls who are fully transformed by their stay at the hills, because at first they seem to be very uneasy around native servants, Ayas, right, who are the Indian maids. However, after a short period of time, the girls get used to the rules of the colonies, and they fully take on their roles as leaders of the household. They manage the areas and start to act according to their perceived superiority. As you can see, for instance, in the quote, Margaret is convinced of their civilizing duty as English women in the colonies, and wants to go on, as you can see, to do a little teaching among the poor heathen children, while Kate seems to be completely certain that their only purpose is that of giving orders. So to conclude, and I think that this feels a little bit rushed, it seems that the journey to find a husband, be it on a fishing fleet or at the request of a family member, is not just that, right? Perhaps Taylor is not a reliable narrator, we know that, but we can definitely see some alternatives to the traditional take of on immigration, right? These women were not just there just to get married, because in the process we learn about their other interests. We can see that they like to flirt. They also like to leave the station vicariously. They like to teach, and they like to give orders, for instance. So there is purpose outside of fishing, or rather after fishing, I would say. So perhaps we could say that fishing fleets are not the end for women, but more like the beginning for many of them, because they go on to discover themselves in the process after jumping off the boat. Maybe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicky, for this fascinating topic.